Good afternoon. My name is Sally Berkery and I'm the Managing Director of CEW UK. Thank you for joining us today. Well, we all know that the events of 2020 radically changed the online beauty space as brands learned to connect with influencers from a distance. Self-care took on renewed importance, and of course social causes became a central part of many brands and influencers' conversations. Today I'm delighted to welcome Brit McCorquodale, SVP of Revenue, our CW partners Tribe Dynamics, who is going to take us through some best-in-class case studies to help identify the key trends and strategies that helped high-growth beauty brands expand their earned media footprints in what was a pivotal year, and what we can expect from 2021. Do please ask questions via the Q&A panel at the bottom, and Brit will try to get to these at the end. But without further ado, I'll hand over the mic to you, Brit, and see you in a moment.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Sally. I am so excited to be here. It is always such a pleasure to be with CEW, and thank you so much for joining today. I think, as Sally mentioned, it has just been, a roller coaster of a year plus for us, and I think shedding some light on not just what happened, but really how we can focus a lot of the learnings from 2020, early 2021, and really put it to good use for what we think is to come. So the point of today is to do that, to really talk about what we're seeing, some trends that came out of 2020 that are really here to stay, and to have a conversation about how they'll impact 2021 and beyond, and how we can all incorporate those learnings into our business as we all move forward into hopefully brighter days. I'm gonna share my screen, really, Sally, to pop in if we are not sharing the way we want to. So just to back up really quickly, I think that most people on the webinar are familiar with Tribe Dynamics. For those who are not, really just want to do a brief introduction of who we are, why we're here, the data that we look at, how we work with brands. As I said, we'll talk about kind of the 2020 trends impacting the future, and then really dig into the brands that are leading those trends, leveraging those trends, and kind of how we can all apply some of those learnings to our own business. And then common theme for today is going to be around retention. When I talk about retention, I'm specifically talking about relationship retention, and we'll talk about a number of reasons that is incredibly and increasingly important this year. But also, how you can look at that, measure that, and really apply good retention models and efforts to your influencer programs moving forward. And then, as Sally said, please pop in. Q&A is always good. I want to make sure this is a valuable conversation for everyone. So no question is off limits. Use the Q&A box and we'll try to get to those at the end. So Tribe Dynamics is an influencer marketing software company. We work with brands in the beauty, fashion, and lifestyle spaces. And really what we're doing is helping to capture all of the content created by the influencer community about a given brand, and then help brands track, measure, and manage those programs at scale. So we're looking at posts from influencers, brands, retailers, publications on all of the major platforms, actually including TikTok now as well, which we'll talk about today. Obviously, huge impact on influencer programs and consumer preferences today. But really what we're doing is we're measuring engagement to really understand the value of each individual influencer relationship, each post, and each effort from a brand. So what we can do is, not only I think at the brand and influencer level, help to prioritize and ascertain, again, kind of where the value is coming from, but also based on this engagement, this consumer engagement, the content influencers are choosing to create, really what are people interested in? How are conversations and content evolving over time? So we use that data to structure our predictions and our insights on the trends that we're seeing based on the conversations that are happening in the influencer space. And this matters. This is not news to any of you. This plays a huge role in the both growth and success of brands today. This is the way consumers are both discovering brands and products, vetting brands and products. I mean, it is absolutely a part of the purchasing process for almost every purchase that we make in beauty, and has really replaced traditional word of mouth in terms of third-party authority or credibility. And we've just seen this continue to increase over time. We've recently started working with companies like Gymshark and Everlane, again, companies who were really similar to the beauty brands that we've worked with in the past, which is they've started with this real organic traction, and have been able to harness that passion from their fan and influencer communities to really build their business to scale in an incredibly short amount of time. So again, no news to anyone here, but this is an incredibly important space. And I think we've just seen influencer marketing and kind of these scaled earned media programs that really rely on these large organic communities of influencers creating content about brands and products as a huge business driver, and increasingly placed at the center of marketing programs. Okay, switching into the meat of today, I'm just going to go really quickly through some of the high-level trends, considerations, again, things that we saw in 2020 that are not only going to stay around, but I think 2020 definitely accelerated some trends across the board, and these apply there as well. These are things that we had seen started pre-2020, pre-pandemic, but really were, I think, galvanized over the past 12 months and in a way where we feel really confident that these are some of the things that are going to take us into the rest of the year and 2022 and beyond. The first is influencer selectivity. So what we saw in our data in 2020 is a decrease in branded post count. And if you pull back a couple of layers there, really what's happening, in addition to there being fewer opportunities for branded content during the pandemic based on restrictions, the lack of events, really what's happening is that influencers are putting fewer brands in any single given post. So what we used to see is there would be, any number of brands, a dozen plus brands in a single post, carrying over, from post to post, say on Instagram. And what we've seen is that influencers are really starting to limit that, both again in the number of brands mentioned and the number of posts on kind of stickier channels like Instagram Grid. So again, what that means, I think, for brands is that there are fewer opportunities for influencers to post about your brand. So again, these relationships become, front and center, incredibly important. Another reason I think that we've seen the decrease in branded posts is the distribution of more content to ephemeral channels. Obviously, Instagram stories has just been taking the world by storm, TikTok, increasing in importance every single day. And as content migrates to these channels, the content becomes inherently less branded. So while there are significantly more posts on stories than Instagram Grid, fewer of them are branded. And so things to keep in mind, again, I think, we're working again in an environment that's a bit more selective, I think, than it was a year and a half ago. Sally mentioned this in her intro, self-care here to stay. I think 2020 really reminded ourselves that it feels good to take care of ourselves and that we need to do this. We've seen in our data for the last 5 years, skincare has just really hit its stride in terms of momentum. We continued to see that in 2020 as well. But self-care, I think, extended beyond that into more holistic health, expansion into other categories, really looking at the crossover between wellness and makeup and skincare and lifestyle and just being good to yourself. And as we enter the world again, we think self-care is here to stay. Virtual escapism and self-expression. This is a really interesting one. We'll talk a little bit more about this. This is a really UK specific trend that really helped to boost cosmetics earned media value across 2020, especially coming into the back half of the year. This creative makeup trend, this idea of like self-expression, again, is something that was really specific to the UK market that helped the UK market outperform some of the other markets in earned media value. And we'll share some numbers and examples there. Inclusivity and BIPOC brand support. Again, social causes were at the center of our conversations this year, and they've really, I think, are here to stay. A consumer and influencer demand for inclusivity the support consumers are giving to more diverse influencers, more diverse brands and products is just at an all-time high, and I think is something that is also going to stick around. And then this is not just influencers, this is all of us. People are craving a return to normalcy. We see this in our influencer content, conversations, with the conversations brands are having with their influencer communities, but it's not a simple formula. And I think, again, we'll talk about this maybe a bit more at the end, but for me, really what this kind of leans into is, yet again, relationships will be the foundation of sustained success. As we decide how to kind of return to in real life events, launches, efforts, initiatives, it's going to be really important to connect with your influencer communities and understand, meet them where they are in terms of their comfort levels, especially early on. Just to understand what makes sense for you as a brand, and again, more importantly, them as a community and as a set of individuals. So I think the human aspect here is just going to be really prevalent throughout this conversation. Hopefully it's not too redundant, but we'll talk about retention quite a bit. Again, maintaining and nurturing the relationships that you have is just absolutely the bedrock of what we're seeing of successful brands right now. So looking at a couple of brand case studies, combating influencer selectivity. One of the things that I think often gets overlooked, but is incredibly important, I think just in the same way, if you looked at your allocation of sales, hero products drive brand success. It is really easy for us from an earned media standpoint to get really focused on the newness, right? Like, what are we launching? What are we doing? And that is incredibly important. But hero products drive a significant percentage of a brand's total earned media value. So e.l.f., for example, which is here on the right side of the screen, nearly like 30+% of their total EMV was driven by the two hero products in the back half of 2020. And so I think that just serves as a good reminder of us all that these are the products that people are using every day still. These are the products that we need to continue to support, to find new ways to get into people's hands, to make sure that we understand our community's favorites, their interests, and are really kind of supporting them in the same way we think about our launches of new products. The graph on here, I think, is quite interesting as well. It just shows how strongly correlated the performance of a hero product, being Laura Mercier's translucent loose setting powder, and total EMV, which is the darker purple line up top, is. So you can see when there's a dip in the hero product earned media value, there's a dip in total earned media value. So again, don't forget about your hero products. I think, we're all excited moving forward to continue to invest in and see what's new and out there, but don't forget the favorites that exist today. Relationship retention, surprise, surprise, we're talking about it again. Be Perfect, number 7 brand by EMV in the UK in the back half of 2020, with 74% year-over-year EMV increase, doing really well. 2/3 of their community was consistent from the first half of 2020 to the back half of 2020. And I think when you see some of these numbers, they don't sound that surprising, but this is a really high retention number. The 67% retention rate is incredible in terms of absolute, number of influencers talking about you. And we'll talk later on about, the difference in value of kind of people that have been with you for a long time versus new influencers. I think that there's some pretty interesting nuance there. But what I think what we want to really hammer home here is that some of the top brands, both in the UK and the US and across the world, are really focusing on influencer retention as their primary focus, making sure that the community that has loved them stays engaged, happy, has more reason to create content. Lottie London, so oftentimes we talk about communities at large, and so I just wanted to give an example. Lottie London is doing incredibly well in earned media value, growing very quickly. 167% year-over-year increase in EMV, and a 40% increase just in the back half of the year compared to the first half. So 2020 was a really, really good year, young brand. But one thing that I think is really interesting is taking this specific relationship, their relationship with influencer Layla Swan, who they've now done several product collaborations with. It follows the path that we would lay out as an ideal. This is the way you should work with influencers. And this started out with a really organic endorsement. Layla endorsed a product of Lottie's. They reached out, worked very quickly on a product collaboration that sold out 5 days after launch globally, and then very quickly followed on with a collection that they launched with her as well, which is now their number 2 product in earned media value. She has also consistently stayed a top influencer for them. So it's rewarding, it's rewarding somebody who kind of found the brand organically, was really interested in their products, whose fans saw her be rewarded. So it just really, again, kind of follows, it like checks all the boxes of a really good way to build a strong foundation for a progressive relationship. This obviously evolved very quickly, but I think one thing that we can all keep in mind is creating influencer onboarding strategies is, I think, not something that a lot of our clients have put a ton of thought into, but we're really pushing that right now, which is when a new influencer mentions the brand, when you choose to reach out and engage with them, have a pretty deliberate and detailed onboarding strategy. How are you going to get to know them? What kind of information do you want to capture about them so that you can, again, get them more excited about the brand over time? What products do you want to send them? What do you need in order to do that? And then again, what metrics or signals are you looking for to identify when it's time to level up that relationship? Those kinds of things will help you, again, do that at scale without it being kind of a case-by-case basis. So shifting into the second trend, UK cosmetics boost. I mentioned this in the setup, but one of the really interesting things that happened in the back half of the year, actually the full year, is that the UK outperformed the US in earned media value. From a kind of a half year or a full category standpoint, in the back half of 2020. So looking at US cosmetics at large and UK cosmetics at large, UK cosmetics is, again, kind of beating out. And then within the top 10, you'll see that even more distinctly true. So the UK, 6 out of the top 10 brands grew in earned media value in the back half of the year. And in the US, all 10 brands declined. And so we asked our research team to look into this a bit more and to help us, identify what's really fueling UK cosmetics in a time that was really tough from an earned media value standpoint for pretty much cosmetics across the board in all markets. And this creative makeup trend really fueled a lot of the energy and conversation. So, 500 beauty influencers over the last 6 months authored a total of 6,000 posts, including the hashtag creative makeup. And that's just one hashtag. So there's more conversation around this trend than just connected to that hashtag. But as a clean way to look at it and kind of show the scale of the conversation, that was up 20+% from the past year. And then interestingly, I think the 52% year-over-year increase in content volume, again, just using creative makeup as the tag, was again a huge driver across the board. And I think there's a couple of examples and a couple of implications here that can apply, I think, across the board. There were two communities really around this creative makeup trend, special effects being one. So you saw brands like Mayron Makeup, Danessa Myricks really benefit from these like transformative events and effects. And that is something that's not new, but we saw, again, really benefit brands during this time and have definitely seen a resurgence in this transformative experience using makeup. The second, which I think is really interesting, especially coming up to the summer where we're all hoping to get back out to the pubs and clubs and everything else, is Euphoria makeup. So brands like P. Louise Academy, Be Perfect, high pigment brands, Lottie London is another good example here, really benefited from this, this trend of creating Euphoria makeup looks. And that is something that I think does have application outside of the home, as we all go back to the activities that we love doing. High pigment products is something that we've seen across the board, especially in the back half of the year, start to do really well. And so, as you're kind of making your bets on the products and product lines that will kind of see renewed popularity as we all re-enter the world, I think that's one of the areas that we're assuming is going to continue to do well, like high pigment lip, eyeshadow, again, like really people wanting to kind of put it on and get out of the house. Challenges, nothing new, but I do think that it's really interesting to comment on here. Made by Mitchell, new brand, kind of launched back in October, a series called Mondays by Mitchell, and they asked their community to create a look that was put out by the founder, makeup artist, and it really kind of pushed people. I love this quote in the example post of pushing me outside of my comfort zone, kind of giving me something to do. It really galvanized their community in the absence of in real life events. And I think that continuing to think about ways to virtually engage communities when we are able to have in real life events is going to be something that is going to continue to boost the best programs. Again, having both touch points is kind of like our toolkit has just gotten bigger now. And so as we return to kind of in person, what are the things that worked really well during this year that we should keep as a part of our go-to, and especially as we're planning our efforts for the year. Self-care. Self-care just became a wider conversation this year. It crossed categories. It grew a lot. Again, this is based on the hashtag self-care. Obviously, the conversation goes beyond just that hashtag, but as an example, 81% year-over-year increase in content volume around hashtag self-care. So the amount of people creating content and the amount of posts about self-care just exploded this year. And really that was driven by smaller scale influencers. There's a widespread adoption here across micro and established influencers. Again, just seeing that, I think what started as more of a niche conversation, say a year and a half ago around self-care, has really broadened into a wider conversation that kind of connects different communities. High growth brands in this space and actually across the board, again, we talked about this kind of crossing categories. Skincare friendly makeup, clean and ingredient focused skincare, and The Ordinary is a great example there, continuing to do incredibly well in earned media value. Accessible, so price friendly value. CeraVe, great example. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but Versed, another one. These are kind of the core categories or kind of, these are the types of brands that we saw perform the best in the back half of 2020. And I do think these are examples of things that customers care about more now than they have in the past. Price sensitivity and accessibility in terms of affordable quality, that is nothing new. I mean, we've been seeing that in our data for probably the past 5 years when masstige brands really started to kind of come on strong and take share from some of the more established prestige players. And we're seeing that people expect and want to be able to get high quality products at an affordable or accessible price. And it's something that the market has really met. I think the broadening of the community is worth noting. It's here as well. We're doing a lot of work internally at Tribe to really bring in more lifestyle influencers, influencers who wouldn't traditionally talk about beauty. We've absolutely seen an increase in the crossover opportunities to really broaden your own brand community and influencer community and the conversations that you care about around these ideas, around these kind of almost value or purpose-driven conversations. And so the ability to bring in broader communities, I think, is something that we're going to see quite a bit of moving forward. And I think brands can get really interesting with really creative and do this in really interesting ways. Whether you have to figure out what makes sense for your brand based on your brand values, but absolutely something that is going to continue to kind of fuel your ability to grow your community over time. More and more people are talking about a diverse set of categories than they have before. Inclusivity in BIPOC brands. This is not a surprising conversation to anybody. This year really put renewed focus around social causes. I think the thing I want to focus on in this conversation is that BIPOC founded brands have done really well across categories. These are a handful of brands that we pulled out. You'll see beauty and skincare. These year-over-year growth numbers are pretty incredible. This is US data. I do want to point that out. Most of the data we've been looking at is UK specific. But I think, one of the things that stood out to me as we were starting to dig into this data is that there was a distinct difference in the way these BIPOC brands drove earned media value in the US versus the UK in 2020, and specifically in the summer and beyond. In the US, a lot of the conversations were around the specific support of BIPOC brands. So you saw, a renewed number of influencers really, and brands as well, really putting forward their support of BIPOC-owned brands. In the UK, it's been a much more kind of consistent journey. The momentum has been much more consistent. And really what we've seen in terms of what's driving that momentum is less around this kind of concerted support around the social causes that bubbled to the surface this year and this summer, but just actual ongoing kind of strategic brand activities and content trends. So I think, take that as you will, but I think for me in the UK, really what we're seeing is that BIPOC brands are incredibly sophisticated in the way they're running these programs and are continuing to kind of follow best practices in a way that is continuing to increase their momentum and ability to drive increased earned media value as the communities around them grow and become more diverse and inclusive. Okay, last but not least, talked about retention a bunch. Wanted to do a little bit of a retention deep dive just so everyone understands exactly what it is we're talking about. I'm going to use CeraVe as an example. CeraVe is a brand that we have talked about a lot in early 2021, a lot in the back half of the year. They're just doing incredibly well right now. And I think they're doing incredibly well for a lot of the right reasons. And so we'll take a look at their retention efforts first and foremost, and then kind of use CeraVe as an example to come back to some of our high points and see how a brand is actually putting those into practice to drive enormous success in earned media value. They're up 221% year over year. So this is the community around CeraVe. So these are influencers talking about CeraVe both in 2019 and 2020. So if you look at the first kind of column here, they retained 548 of their influencers from 2019 to 2020, lost 639, and gained almost 2,500. So a few things to note there. First, if you look at just the influencers they retain, which is 550, they drove significantly more earned media value than the 2,500 new influencers. So 17 million in EMV versus 12 million in EMV from 550 influencers versus 2,500. So again, what you're seeing is that this retained group is incredibly productive and potent. These are people you've been working with. They love your product. You're probably engaging with them at higher levels. And so they're just an incredibly productive group. And so understanding the relative value, like if you just looked at that column on the left of retain, lost, and new, you might think, okay, I need to focus on new because the ability to get that many new influencers is amazing. And yes, that's true. But again, if you look at the value those segments or groups are producing, it just shows the importance of your retained community. So I think keep that in mind. Again, what we've seen brands doing in terms of really focusing on retention is just paying such close attention to the influencers that are talking about you, making sure you're bringing them in, onboarding them to the brand in good ways, making sure they stay engaged, that they have updated, preferences, that they're always have opportunities to engage with the brands in new and creative ways, but honestly, just staying in touch. We're talking about a lot of relationships, so it's quite hard to manage, but from a prioritization standpoint, this is a good way to look at it. I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that new influencers are incredibly important as well. So making sure that you are, again, onboarding these influencers in ways that make sense. Not all 2,500 of those influencers are going to stick around, right? These are people that maybe talked about the brand once, twice in the last, 6 to 12 months. And so being able to prioritize across that group of 2,500 is incredibly important, especially as teams are not, meeting the scale of total community size. So prioritize who you're engaging with based on who's driving the most value, again, starting with your retained influencers. So let's look at what CeraVe is doing right. And again, this is kind of a bit of a wrap up of all the things that we've talked about in the form of one example, and then we'll move into Q&A. But they've really embraced new earned media platforms. We haven't talked a ton about TikTok since the beginning of our conversation today, but hugely important. And brands are continuing to figure out the right ways to engage with TikTok influencers, also discovering TikTok influencers that they can bring into the fold, incredibly important part of strategies moving forward. We just launched a survey of our customers, and of the respondents, I believe 98% said TikTok influencers were of very high importance to their upcoming 2021 strategies. So TikTok is going to be, it's going to play a big role. Accessible quality, again, we talked about this. This is something that CeraVe does very well, and creates good conversation around that. I think it's great to be, in the right category at the right time, but it's also something that you can drive a conversation around, and they do a really good job of that. They've also embraced their core community. Again, this comes back to retention, but it also comes back to kind of finding your squad, your core people, and for them, it's social dermatologists. A lot of their top influencers are social dermatologists. It lends credibility to the brand. It fits in with their brand ethos, and kind of who they are. And then, like we talked about, excellent influencer retention, 139% retention in terms of earned media value, which means they would have grown 39% year over year without a single new influencer. So again, think about the value of that retained influencer set, continuing to nurture, make them more productive. And then they grew their influencer community as well. So again, that 221+% is really driven here in these core activities. So that is it for me. I think we covered a lot of ground. I'm hoping it wasn't too much, but really wanted to get through, again, a lot of the areas that we're seeing really come together and focus where our clients' energies are for the upcoming year, where our focus is, and hopefully lay out some considerations for how we can all think about how well positioned we can be for the changes that are ahead of us. So we do have some questions. Okay, I'm going to start with Rosie. How can smaller brands make an impact without having the budget to spend on influencers? It's a really good question, Rosie. I think, backing up, for us, we're about 8 years old as a company. And when we started, the brands that were engaging in influencer marketing were the brands that had no budget. They didn't have the distribution power, they didn't have the advertising dollars. And so this was really their currency. They were able to send their product to influencers. And I think that is something that is still exists. And overwhelmingly, the large majority of the content that we see created is organic in nature versus paid. And so I think first and foremost, finding the influencers that are already talking about your brand and engaging with them and building relationships with them by sending them products, by creating events. I think the budgets can scale based on what's possible for your brand, but that relationship is really what matters. And influencers of every size continue to create content about the brands and products they love, despite the budgets that are attached. I do think where we see the biggest challenges in budgets across the board of brands of all sizes is really in headcount, right? Like the operational expenses that it takes to manage programs at scale. And so I think, what we've talked a lot about with our clients is really understanding at the team level kind of the role and value each person is playing. So if you think about the way you would run a sales team, you would really be measuring the performance of each of your team members based on the sales, the groups of customers that they're selling to. And I think you can take a similar approach to validate increased headcount. Again, if that piece of the budget is really where you're challenging with or being challenged with, looking at, I'm in charge of these 500 influencers. Sally's in charge of these 500, and Sally is actually growing the value of her 500 influencer relationships threefold every year. That probably means that Sally's really good at her job, and also that we have opportunity to do more. So applying measurement, I think, is always incredibly helpful as you're vying for more budget. And then again, really focusing on kind of the 101s of relationship building and reaching out to influencers who are already creating content about you to build on those organic relationships. Moving up, say what has there been any evidence or correlation between EMV and brand valuation and/or business performance? Yes, absolutely. And we talked about that a bit at the beginning from an anecdotal standpoint, but we've also previously partnered with NPD to run revenue EMV correlation studies. And what we see is that earned media value really tends to be a leading indicator of sales, and more specifically of market share increases and decreases. So the more a brand is increasing their share of voice within their competitive set, within their category, the more likely it is that they're also going to increase their market share. So pretty interesting findings there. And again, something that we're continuing to look at year in, year out to make sure that we can connect earned media value and these influencer programs to real business results. Let's see, we'll do one more question. Let's see. Nicola, will paid campaigns continue to grow to the detriment of organic? So we have actually not seen this be a competition. Definitely paid campaigns they play a really big role. And I think influencers are professionals. They are businesses. And I think they expect to run themselves as, professionals. And we're actually seeing the creator economy just explode with, tools for businesses. I think Signal Fire, which is a VC, published an article that said influencers and content creators are the fastest growing small business in the world. And so I think that just is an acknowledgement of, yes, like I think paid relationships, paid campaigns are going to continue to play a role. There's also other ways to work payments that I think are quite interesting. And we've definitely seen a shift away from kind of specific commitments, like we'll pay you this many dollars for this many posts, into more tenured relationships, really focusing on how you can partner together over a longer amount of time to mutually benefit both brands. So long answer to your question is, while there is absolutely a continued role for paid, we have not seen the split of organic to paid content change at all. So the more paid content there has been, the more organic content there is too. And that's just a nod to, there are more influencers every day coming into the community. There are more influencers kind of graduating through the ranks, and there are categories and influencers that used to kind of stay in their lane a bit more, that are now talking about any and all categories and getting really strong reception from their audiences. So that ratio of paid and organic is still available and still consistent, and definitely something that I think, again, we've seen the best programs and our clients really leverage the organic passion around their brands to build their programs.
Fantastic. Sorry.
I was going to say, I know there are a few additional questions, which I'm happy to answer. I can write answers. But yeah, I was gonna say, I see Sally, so we can also sign off. I also know that it's late in your afternoons.
I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, there were lots of questions, so it might be that we do a bit of a kind of follow-up and just go back to everybody who's joined us today. It's always a very, very busy session when we have Tribe come to the stage. It's always a very popular session. I think we could bring you back monthly and it would still be as busy. So thank you, Brit. Those amazing insights and ever-changing, and we look forward to welcoming you back in the not too distant future, maybe in person, who knows. A little bit of housekeeping from me. We've got obviously the lovely Easter weekend ahead, when we're supposed to be having snow on Monday, I believe, but we are having a break for a couple of weeks. We'll be back on Friday the 16th at 3 p.m, I think, with Beauty Independent for the first of a 5-part series, which we'll be able to share details on soon. We also have our Google Insights session, which is always very popular, on the 21st of April, and that's booking right now. And you'll see on social a bit of a kind of sneak peek. We are selling our tickets for our Beauty Awards product demonstration next week. Will go on sale, so keep an eye out for notifications on that. There's always a bit of a rush, to say the least. But for now, thank you, Brit. It was fantastic. Thank you all for joining us. Do keep in touch, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.